Hi, this is Jack Beam from Beam Legal Team with my partner Matt Patterson, and I want to talk to you today about Pitocin, the opioid of obstetrics. Now, why do I call it the opioid of obstetrics?
Well, because opioids have a good use too, and Pitocin can be used well. But when abused and overused in the hospital setting, it can cause catastrophic brain damage to babies during labor. Is that right?
That is right, and we see it again and again and again, don't we, Matt?
We do. Why don't you tell the folks, what is Pitocin?
Pitocin is a synthetic hormone that increases contractility. That's a big word. And they use it to induce labor and to deliver babies. And in that sense, it is a good drug, because if you can deliver vaginally as opposed to having to cut a mom open with a C-section, it certainly is preferable. But what we find, and what I've found for the last 30 plus years I've been doing obstetrical and neonatal malpractice cases, is that nurses and doctors, including young residents, do not know how to use it, and they abuse it. And that's why it's come to be called the opioid of obstetrics. So talk a little bit about whether you call it tacky systole or excessive uterine activity. Talk a little bit, Matt, about how Pitocin causes ultimately lack of oxygenation to the baby.
Sure. So tacky systole is just a fancy word for too many contractions that are too strong. And Pitocin, if abused in a hospital, can cause contractions that are too frequent, meaning occurring too often, or that are too strong. And what that does during labor is it causes a compression on the mom's uterus and then the placenta, and that stops blood flow from the mom to baby. Well, blood carries a very, very important thing from mom to baby throughout the pregnancy and during labor, and that's oxygen. So if you have too many contractions that are too strong and go on for too long, that is going to do one thing for sure. It's going to deprive the baby of enough oxygen during the labor.
And there's really no excuse for it, because modern medicine has something called electronic fetal heart monitors. And those monitors record both the baby's heart rate and also the contractions. That is the frequency, the duration of the contractions. And if a nurse or doctor know how to read a monitor strip, which we find all too often they do not know how to read a monitor strip. Let me just say that again, because it may come as a surprise to some people that people would use a drug, and Pitocin is one of 11 high alert meds according to the Federal Food and Drug Administration, right?
That sounds about right.
And yet they use this drug and they don't watch the monitor, or if they're watching it, they don't understand that contractions that come too close together can cause this lack of oxygenation to the baby. It's just like, running wind sprints. I know, Matt, you were a Division I athlete in college, and you know what wind sprints are, I think. I gave up on athletics, I think, shortly after junior high. Flag football I kept, hurting my fingers. It's a rough game.
Well, the injury list can be for all of us, and Division's one a little liberal, but why don't we try to show the folks an example?
Okay.
So this is one page of what you described as an electronic fetal heart monitor. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. And what do these squiggly lines down here at the bottom of the page tell the doctors and nurses about what's going on with mom and baby?
Well, they tell us that there are contractions. They tell us how frequent they are and how long they last, because these squares down there are a certain amount of time, and if I recall right, they're about a minute each.
Right. So these graphs are timed paper, and they're running on a continuous roll. So here's 1 minute, here's another minute, and so on and so forth. So every time you see a rise in this line at the bottom, that's a contraction going on in the uterus, and this device records that. And when it goes back down, that's when the uterus relaxes between contractions. That's an important time, isn't it, Mr. Beam?
Yes, it is. We got a $53 million verdict on this case. One of the things that was important, I believe this was an intrauterine pressure catheter. And with the intrauterine pressure catheters, what becomes important is also the resting tone, what the elevation is. And if that elevation is too high, that's not good for the baby either.
So we talked about a little bit about what the bottom of the graph shows. What's this line up here?
That is the baby's heart rate.
And what does the baby's heart rate during a labor tell the doctors and nurses about how that baby's doing?
Well, you want to look to see if there's good reactivity, if there's no decelerations, because decelerations are not a good thing. And you want to see accelerations, which is a good thing.
So taking a look at this example, is this too many contractions, not enough contractions, or somewhere in between?
These are too many contractions. This is clearly an overdose of Pitocin, and this is a case that ultimately led to hypoxic ischemic brain damage to our baby boy.
And does the heart rate show that here?
The heart rate shows, on this one I see what, maybe one, two, at least two decelerations.
So is this a classic example of a baby in distress from too much Pitocin?
Yes, it is.
And I have I think it's a simple question for you. But when doctors and nurses see too many contractions causing a bad heart rate and fetal distress, what are the doctors and nurses supposed to do?
Well, they're supposed to shut the Pitocin off.
It's that simple?
It's that simple, and it has a pretty short half-life, and they can stop this right away, and then they can make a determination. In this case, they should have done a earlier cesarean section, and we would have had a healthy baby boy, but they did not.
And that's our brief discussion on Pitocin, the opioid of obstetrics, and make sure to check out our other videos and subscribe to the vlog.